it felt like a moment that it became obvious to Florida that there was nothing they could do to stop this team.
Hey, welcome to Beat Everyone. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com, and we are back for another edition of our new series, Alabama Football's Best 15 Games of the 21st Century. And we're counting down from 15 to 1. We started last week with LSU 2014, had a great discussion on what was a classic game. Today it's number 14, and helping me to do this, as usual, is Beat Everyone producer Matt Scalisi. Matt, you think people are going to like this one?
This is a fun one to me. It's from a season that I and we'll talk about it here, but I feel like everyone's brains, for very understandable reasons, are very hazy about the season that we're going to be talking about today. So it's this needed a refresher, frankly.
Yeah, it was a season when people needed football, right? Like they needed the escape of football, and football didn't really even help much, even considering the success of the season. I'm sure it did to some degree, just considering the dominance of it. But Matt, our pick for the 14th best Alabama football game from the 21st century is Alabama versus Florida in the 2020 SEC championship game. And we've also got a very special guest to help us do this, someone who played in the game. Our friend and former Alabama wide receiver Slade Bolden. You're going to hear his take on what became an instant classic throughout this episode in a conversation with Matt. But we're going to run through some categories about what we remember and loved about this game shortly, the best plays, the best players, moments, and much more. But Matt, first, let's set the table here a little bit. The year was 2020. That's what you were referencing there, obviously. Nothing big happening that year or anything. Just some good old-fashioned SEC football, no strings attached, no context needed. But let's try it. What were you and the rest of the world doing in 2020 before this football season even began?
Before the football season, well, honestly, Ben, we were wondering what we were going to do instead of covering football that season. And I mean, I don't want to even get into some of the ideas that we had, but I mean, it was, look, if you are a person who for a living makes content about college football and you're not going to have a college football season, that is going to keep you up at night. And it did. But you know, it was sort of wild how fast it came together and how much everybody was able to throw everything that we've been told about how college football has to work, that you have to schedule these games years and years in advance, that it takes so much organization. And that's not to minimize the efforts of the people who made that season happen. But like, if this sport wants to move in big ways and do so quickly, 2020 was kind of proof forever that they can do that if they want to. And it will forever be weird to have to explain to people the big giant exception that is the 2020 season compared to how everything else worked before and after it.
Yeah, so obviously COVID was happening in 2020. You'll all remember. It feels like yesterday, but it's 5.5 years ago, thereabout, which is unbelievable. And it's crazy to think like how long ago this season was. It almost feels like a decade ago this season in a lot of ways. A distant memory, but one that people are cherishing because this was obviously the last time Nick Saban and the Alabama football team won a national championship. Not the last time they won the SEC championship, which they do in this game against Florida. But, you know, thinking back on the things that you said about how is college football going to work, should it even work, was a big conversation. Should they even have a college football season? The SEC and some of the other major conferences decided to forge ahead, have a season, make it as normal as possible for people, even with things like limited capacity. So you remember in these huge stadiums that hold 100,000 people, there are these pods, these pockets of people riddled throughout the stadium. They're probably piping in game day crowd noise so to make it as normal as possible for the players. It was a very strange time, but we were all, yes, as people who worked at AL.com and in sports news, we were very excited, but fans obviously just wanted this to happen badly, and they managed to pull it off.
That is one of the things I think that will always stand out about this season too, and that as we talk to younger fans, I have a 13-year-old son who's getting into college football now. As we see clips from that season, and look, it's a historic season for Alabama, so people are gonna, if you're an Alabama fan, you're gonna see a lot of clips from that season. It's weird to have to see these empty stands behind so many of these iconic plays. I mean, you had a player that had a Heisman Trophy season for Alabama that year, and a lot of his big plays you can see empty bleachers behind him, and it's not because they were beating the other team so badly in the fourth quarter that everybody left, although that also was true for many of these games.
Well, let's quickly have this conversation because you mentioned and I mentioned the empty stadiums behind these amazing feats of athleticism and these amazing games that were happening. One that we're about to talk about, it's the COVID year, right? And
Mhm.
people often joke about like the LeBron James NBA championship that he won in the bubble at Disney World or whatever, wherever exactly they had it. But do you think that the 2020 season and Alabama's 2020 championship deserves any sort of asterisk, or do you think that it was a relatively level playing field?
I've talked to players who were on that team, and obviously you're going to hear from Slade Bolden here about that too.
But it's part of it. You have to prepare for any possibility. But it was weird, even like during the season, every week you didn't know. We obviously knew we were going to show up and be ready, but you never know if somebody had to cancel or forfeit initially because they didn't have enough guys healthy to play. So it was weird. But I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of the SEC teams that we played, which was every game, was similar to us. They had plenty of healthy guys. I think the only team that tried to make an excuse was LSU because I knew they probably knew they were going to get the ass handed to them, which they did. But it's funny because every week we were like, hell, we may not even play this game, but we prepared so much better than anybody before the season started on a conditioning strength, and I obviously give a lot of credit to Jeff Allen, our training staff, Coach Saban, and our weight training staff, Baloo and Ray. I mean, I was in the best shape I've ever been. I was the healthiest I've ever been on a physical standpoint, and I think when we showed up, we dominated everyone. We finished stronger than everyone, and obviously we had such a good, explosive team, and obviously offense was so explosive. I think it's hard to argue with people who don't think we're one of the best teams to ever come through college football because of COVID. You take away COVID, I still think we dominate and go undefeated. That's just how good we were individually. It was such just a special time, and I think that whole COVID aspect also brought us together even closer as a team. Like, hey, we have to buy in if we want to be successful.
No asterisk for you on that season?
Of course not. You go 10 SEC games in a row. I don't COVID or not. You tell me how that goes for you.
I've talked to other players on the team who have. I don't think they would put an asterisk on it because ultimately everybody was playing under the same conditions. But I think they do feel like it was different. It wasn't a normal season and it wasn't a normal championship. And that's because there was a different factor that played such an outsized role, they felt, in how some of these games went. Alabama very rarely was at less than full strength that entire season, and they very rarely played an opponent that was at full strength. And obviously, it's because there were COVID testing protocols that were pretty strict, and if you were exposed in any way, if you tested positive, obviously, you weren't allowed to play. And so a lot of teams would have to either uh, to move a game or forfeit, or they would have to field the best they could. They would have to field a team that was missing a lot of starters. I know one game that gets brought up that season was when Alabama played Kentucky. That team was absolutely decimated. It was nothing like what would Alabama have won the game anyway? Probably. Would they have won as definitively as they did? Who is to say? Now, I will say this: Alabama playing against Florida in this game was a one of the rare times that season that the other team was really at full strength or close to it, and they were loaded with very, very talented players on both sides of the ball. This was a very good Florida team, and a lot of these guys ended up in the NFL the next year.
Yeah. Kentucky was decimated, and then they got decimated by 60 points.
They absolutely did.
63-3. But and also Alabama, there was a game, the Iron Bowl, right, which wasn't the final game of the regular season. Nick Saban got COVID and missed it, and Steve Sarkisian was the game day head coach. So it was just a weird season altogether. So, I mentioned we were going to go through some categories here, Matt. So let's do it. The first thing we're going to hit is the opening drive here. We're going to contextualize the game. We're going to talk about what was happening at that point in the season, the state of the program, touch on a few key storylines heading into this game. And I'll just touch on a few here. Alabama played a 10-game regular season with nothing but SEC opponents.
So weird.
So no cupcakes, even if they made the rest of the conference look like cupcakes at various points. And they rarely struggled in 2020. The only game other than this one against Florida where things got a little hairy for what would become a historically dominant Alabama football team was Ole Miss. In their third game of the season, Lane Kiffin's team put up 647 total yards on Pete Golding's offense. They did whatever they wanted on offense, and Alabama had no answer for them on defense. And, it just so happened that Alabama had plenty of answers on offense. They put up 723 total yards themselves. I think, Matt, they gained nearly every possible yard that they could have that night. Just a remarkable performance. Do you remember that?
Yeah, a crazy season offensively. And this was, I mean, I think that Steve Sarkisian's reputation as an offensive play caller was already pretty solid going into the 2020 season. I think 2020 cemented him as this is a generational talent at doing this particular thing. I think it's obviously what got him the Texas job. It was a very important season for him. And I will say, I don't think anybody has been more dominant strategically against the teams he was facing off against than Steve Sarkisian was in 2020. It was a feat that it is hard to find a comparison for. I mean, you can go back and maybe find a couple of those Kirby Smart defenses for Alabama where they just didn't let anybody do anything all year. But this was just even watching this game, Ben, and watching the national championship game after a couple of games later, I guess, it strikes me how many times this isn't just Alabama somehow found a way to keep moving the ball and scoring points. How many times they score and there's no one within 5 yards of the player with the ball. It was an absolutely dominant play calling effort by Steve Sarkisian to find weaknesses and exploit them at a level that I just don't think I've ever seen with another offensive coordinator.
I think Coach Sark did such a good job of not only utilizing the talent he had on the field, which was pretty good. He would probably even tell you that it wasn't a hard job for him because of the guys we had. But I think what he did so well was being able to come up with different schemes, on a weekly basis that it would be the same concept, but we would just twist just a little thing about it. Okay, like we did this for a couple of weeks. Now we're just going to add this little different twist to it. And I think, with guys who try to watch film, teams we play, like try to just really hone in on our offense. I think Sark did such a great job, and obviously everyone bought into it and was able to learn quickly and execute it at a high level. But I think that was just we could run so many different concepts out of one main concept, whether that's passing or in the run game. And I think that gave a lot of people a lot of problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the whole he has all the infinity stones thing, right? Like he has the perfect quarterback for his system, the perfect wide receiver and wide receivers for his system, the perfect running back. The offensive line was one of the best in the country. And it was amazing. We're going to talk a little bit more about Steve Sarkisian as we go. But, this is all to say that Alabama smoked everybody this season except for Ole Miss and Florida in the SEC title game. But, the crazy thing is not once did you ever feel like Alabama was going to lose because the offense was just that dominant. No matter what the other team did, you knew that they couldn't stop Mac Jones, Najee Harris, and the eventual Heisman winner, DeVonta Smith, who by this point, by the time he's playing Florida, is actively becoming an immortal in the sport, in all of college football, let alone at Alabama football. But, a week before this, they finished the regular season. They beat Arkansas on the road 52-3. And that was one of the 4 games, strangely enough, when DeVonta Smith didn't lead the team in receiving yards, but he had a punt return for a touchdown, essentially setting him up for a Heisman clinching performance in the SEC title game if he rose to the occasion, if he had a big game. Florida was a very good team. They were coached by Dan Mullen at this point still. They were 8-2 going into the game. They had just actually lost to LSU. The quarterback.
A famously weird loss. For people who don't remember, I believe that was the shoe game, if I'm not mistaken.
Who throws a shoe? If you haven't seen that meme, go find it. Florida, who throws a shoe? It's incredible. Golly, I forgot all about that.
Yeah.
Their quarterback was Kyle Trask. He was also a Heisman finalist. They had these electrifying playmakers that you mentioned, Matt. Guys like Kyle Pitts at tight end, Kadarius Toney at wide receiver, both of whom showed up in big ways in this game. But not an opponent that Alabama fans necessarily feared going into it, I don't think. And if you just kind of go through, we'll do a very quick version of like kind of how this game went. I mean, Alabama gets the ball first. They march down the field for 70 yards in 9 plays. Najee Harris finishes it off with a touchdown run. Just a couple of minutes later, Kadarius Toney beats Malachi Moore on a 51-yard pass from Kyle Trask, and then it's evened up. And you kind of get the sense that this is going to be a shootout, strangely enough, and it's pretty back and forth from that point on, but Alabama never gives up the lead. DeVonta Smith gets his first touchdown right after that with a 31-yard pass where he's as wide open as he's ever been in his entire career. You mentioned the sea of green that was around a lot of Alabama players. That was evident with DeVonta Smith. But in his first touchdown, Florida kicks a field goal after that. Then Alabama dominates the third quarter, 21-7. Florida answers 14-0 in the third before Alabama keeps them at bay in the fourth quarter behind another DeVonta Smith touchdown to seal it, even when Florida makes a late push to cut it to 52-46. They're playing catch up the whole game, and the hole is just too deep for them. Alabama wins it by 6. They're SEC champs, and they go to the Rose Bowl to face Notre Dame. So this kind of takes us to our next category, Matt, standout plays. So we're going to pick one. Typically, we want to pick one for offense. We want to pick one for defense. But as you rewatch the game, when it comes to individual plays, what stands out to you?
I mean, I think to me, and I'm going to go back a little bit, Ben, because you talked about the Heisman race and how that was sort of playing out. I remember that even going into this game, there was an active discussion as to which of 3 Alabama offensive players was most likely to win the Heisman Trophy. And I think that obviously DeVonta Smith had a lot of buzz going for him and ended up winning it. But even to pull the curtain back a little bit, even you and I, Ben, I can remember having a discussion during this SEC championship game saying, did Najee suddenly, like, has he just won the Heisman for himself? Has he taken this trophy away from DeVonta Smith? Because this is an incredible performance from Najee in this game. And to me, the standout offensive moment in this game, there's really, it's kind of 2 back-to-back possessions for Alabama in the second quarter that are both receiving touchdowns by Najee Harris. And to me, the reason why is they really felt like a moment that it became obvious to Florida that there was nothing they could do to stop this team, right? You've somehow managed to force the ball away from DeVonta Smith, and it goes to this unbelievably athletic running back who is able to do things after he gets the ball and is able to catch the ball, in stride, like he was a tight end or a receiver. It's just one of those sort of back-breaking things to see, and to see it on back-to-back offensive possessions for Alabama. It's brutal if you're Florida in that situation. And that to me, being able to identify and execute that Najee Harris is there for those receiving touchdowns once you get to sort of plus territory, That's the big offensive killer in this game to me.
I mean, he's just such a dynamic player and athlete. I mean, um, he's such a just wide variety skill set. I mean, we always knew that. I think what allowed Najee to show what we already knew he had was just the fact that we had guys on the outside that could, you know, I guess exploit a defense in the pass game. But all I'm telling you, and I sound like I'm back in my quarterback days, but all starts up front. Najee being able to run the ball efficiently with our unbelievable O-line allowed our passing game as receivers to open up tremendously. So now, as a defense, you got to not only stop the run, which is unbelievable, whether it's Najee or B-Rob, and then you got to, try to get back if it's a play action or it's a RPO. So you're sitting there constantly guessing and trying to figure out. And then obviously we exploit teams with our different types of concepts that can go one way or the other depending on how we want to run it, that play, and whatever formation we want to run it out of. So we have all these different ways of doing things. So as a defensive player, you're trying to think of all these different outcomes of one play. And then let's say you cover every play action perfectly. Najee pops out of the back. But he also could just run routes well in general. Choice routes, swing routes, bubble, obviously a wheel route here and there, and then just kind of a check down. I mean, he did well, has great hands, and he's really good with the ball in his hands, after the catch. So all that comes together, and it puts the defense in a very, very tough situation.
Yeah, there's the play towards the end of the second quarter where Najee Harris is lined up wide to the right, and there's this weird little stop and go route that he runs that just puts him in space. This is what Sarkisian was so good at, putting his best playmakers in that sea of green where the quarterback could just hit them on the money. Mac does, and then Najee Harris stiff arms his way into the end zone. The guy was just so tough to bring down, was a big guy, so to see him lined up out wide like that, almost like a tight end in a way, like it was just insane to watch, and he was just at his best. This is a huge Najee Harris game, and that's a great play. But there are like 15 amazing plays throughout the entire game, just like a big shootout, and like most of them coming on Alabama's end. But there's one Alabama fans talk about now, and they kind of had to play offense and defense on the same play.
That's right.
Where Mac Jones throws it to Miller Forrestall in tight coverage. It looks like he makes the catch, but Florida defensive back Trey Dean, he rips it from his hands. They rule it as an interception, and he makes it about 15 yards the other way before John Mechie absolutely blasts him like a freight train. No idea he's coming. Just a massive blindside hit. The ball immediately pops loose. Devontae Smith jumps on it to get the ball back for Alabama. And that's got to be the play of the game. It's not even close.
It is the defensive play of the game, and it was done by an offensive player. But Alabama actually had two forced fumbles in this game that they recovered. There was another one by Tim Smith at some point in this game too. But yes, Devontae Smith recovers the fumble forced by John Mechie. An incredible moment. And I actually have, we'll get to it in a minute, but Saban very specifically commented on that play and actually even talked about why he thinks Mechie was able to make that happen. So I'll pull a clip up of that in a few minutes here, but it just was, one of the most bone shattering hits that you've ever seen delivered. And it came from a wide receiver, like a fairly thin guy as wide receivers go.
Yeah, and legal, right?
Totally legal hit.
Alabama got the ball back, and sure enough, Devontae Smith making his Heisman case again, Johnny on the spot, jumping on the ball. But Mechie, regardless of what he did in the Iron Bowl the very next year, he would have been an Alabama legend for that play alone if it was the only play he ever made for the rest of his entire career.
I was surprised to see it actually happen, but when it happened, because we all got a little dog in us, and probably had to play a little defense. Hell, my first semester at Bama, I played safety, but yeah, it was actually just. The hit was awesome, right? It was great, but like it was actually a really big play for us because we were back and forth for a while there with Florida because they had such a talented offense as well. And even though our defense was great, but a lot of good defenses couldn't stop us either. So, we were driving down, I can't remember exactly the score was, but, we were getting close to the red zone, and it's like, hey, like, we need every point we can get. Because you never know if this has to go down to the end in a shootout. We want to have the upper hand. So, that pick, that this guy got, that was huge, a huge hit because the momentum changed just like that. It's like, boom. It was just a holy shit moment. Like, holy shit. You guys give me that. Because I was on the other side because it was like, I remember the concept was like kind of a basic route by the tight end. And I was running, I believe, a drag. I could be wrong, or maybe it was a high corner, but I was nowhere near the play. But I got to watch it, and I was like, oh, my God, like, this is awesome.
So incredible play, one that has been immortalized in many ways, including on an awesome UA graphic poster that they made shortly after this game. Next category, Matt, the kill shot is what we call this. This is the play that Alabama makes that effectively seals the victory. So, Matt, what do you have for this?
Yeah, I think it's got to be that the final touchdown scored by Alabama. It's a 15-yard reception by Devontae Smith. It's his second touchdown in the game. And we jokingly, we talk about how much bigger of a game it was maybe for Najee Harris. But Devontae Smith quietly racks up 15 catches for 184 yards and 2 touchdowns in this game. And that last one, that is the thing that effectively seals the deal. I think Alabama at that point was only up 45-38. So it was still, Florida had clawed their way back into the game. They were a stop away from maybe having another shot at pulling this off and pulling off a huge comeback. And Alabama just offensively, you were not going to stop them that day. You were not going to stop Najee Harris. And even if you did, you weren't going to stop Devontae Smith. That last touchdown, it was just too much for Florida to overcome. There was about 5 minutes left in the game when they scored it. So there's time, but it just would have taken too much for Florida, I think, to be able to pull it off.
Yeah, it's the last Devontae Smith touchdown that you're talking about. That's the kill shot, so to speak. And it was a bittersweet moment because Landon Dickerson, the center, actually tore his ACL on the play.
Right.
But it was a really cool moment watching the rest of the team rally around him as he's carted off. He was obviously beloved by his teammates. But before we go into the next category, I want to give a quick shout out to the defense for making a play when they really needed it at the very end. And, Alabama actually punts the ball back to Florida with 26 seconds left in the game. The score is 52-46, which would be the final score. So Florida, like you said, the window hasn't fully closed. They can win it. Something crazy has to happen. Alabama pins them back to the 12-yard line, and they only have time really for one more play because they don't have any timeouts. And then Christian Harris and Will Anderson, who are teammates on the Houston Texans now, they sack Kyle Trask to seal the game. And again, they have no timeouts, so the game is over. But I want to make a quick note here, Matt. The punt, I mentioned the punt to the 12-yard line. Matt, I have a challenge for you. Name Alabama's starting punter from the 2020 season.
Man,
here's he only punted the ball 22 times.
Wow. Gosh. Well, look, it's kind of in between. It's kind of in between guys, right? Of guys that we would come to know.
I didn't know his name. I would not have gotten this
I
right.
I don't think I can remember him.
And I didn't know his name.
Apologies.
After I read it. His name is Charlie Scott.
Wow. I gotta admit, Ben, it wasn't in my name. It wasn't in my brain even now. For whatever reason, you have evaded my memory, Charlie Scott. But look, he's got a ring, man.
He does. Like I said, he actually split duties with another guy, Sam Johnson, If that rings a bell, he
I
had 10 punts.
I do vaguely recall that there were multiple guys that punted in 2020.
Not often. They didn't punt very often.
But Will Reichard was the place kicker that season,
Yes.
right? So
Yes,
that was sort of early on in his very prolific career for Alabama.
I believe he was a freshman that year, and I think that's right. Is that the year he went perfect where he didn't miss a field goal?
I believe that's right. Yeah.
Point? Pretty sure. Okay, yeah. Shout out to Charlie Scott and Sam Johnson, the punters from the national championship 2020 team in Tuscaloosa. Awesome job by them, especially at the end of that game in Scott's case. All right, Matt, let's name the MVP of this game. Who won the game? This is usually a player. It can be a coach. It can be a broadcaster, someone who went viral or just maybe benefited the most from the game in ways that we obviously still remember and talk about years later. So, Matt, who's the MVP of the SEC championship in 2020?
Obviously, I talked up Najee and the performance from him in this game. And I mean, it's incredible. 178 yards rushing, 67 yards receiving, 5 total touchdowns. But actually, I think I got to go with Mac Jones as my MVP here. And I'll tell you why. The Najee performance, I think, is as superlative as it is in this game, in large part because Mac is able to get the ball to Najee with such incredibly perfect timing, perfect placement. And Mac Jones had a lot of great games in his season at Alabama as the starter. This might be his best game, I think, as Alabama's starting quarterback. He finishes the game 418 yards, 5 touchdowns. You do have the 1 interception, which I honestly don't really even put on Mac, and they recovered it immediately. So no real harm done. But I mean, an incredible performance. And I think so much of why Alabama's offensive output is what it is in this game and in all their best games that season is because Mac was an underrated to this day and very special passer. The speed at which he operated, the precision that he was able to place the ball, it was incredible. And he was the perfect fit for Steve Sarkisian.
The preparation that Mac has is one of one. I think he is by far one of the best preparers. And I can say that about a lot of guys I played with, but he did so well preparing for that game and even probably getting ahead. And so every time he saw a look from the defense, whatever coverage that may be, whatever type of blitz they may bring on, he had already seen it so many times and how they played it against other teams that they played before us that it was just kind of already second nature. Like everything kind of flowed like water. There was no really a kink in the armor. There's no hesitation. It was just, hey, we've seen this look in practice. I've seen this look on film. This is the concept we're about to run for this exact coverage or scheme that the defense is showing. And then I have the guys that are going to execute it. And I have an O-line that's the best in the country that's blocking for me to execute this play. It all just comes together. And, obviously that's something that him and Sarkisian, do throughout the week. And, I try to kind of be a quarterback too, but, their preparation is different. And it's, and I think it was so sound that when it came to actually happening on the field, it was natural. It's like he'd been there before.
Yeah, real quick, I should note that Charlie Scott, we should have remembered this. He was actually the younger brother of J.K. Scott.
No way.
He was.
Boy, this has got to be the most talk Charlie Scott has gotten in a while on an Alabama podcast.
Like you said, he's a champ. And
shout out Charlie.
He made a big play in this game, helped them seal the win.
Yeah,
I think you are right about Mac Jones. And my head says Mac Jones here because you're right. He goes 33 or 43 for more than 400 yards, 5 touchdowns. And you mentioned his only pick is only kind of half his fault. He threw it into light coverage, but it was kind of on the money. Forrestall had his hands on it and just gave it up. The defensive back made a play. But Najee Harris scored 5 touchdowns. I mean, he scored 2 rushing touchdowns.
I can't argue against Najee in this game for
3
sure.
3 receiving touchdowns. He had 31 carries. He had 5 receptions. He beat them every which way. And this is a night, Matt, when Devontae Smith has 15 receptions for 184 yards and a couple of touchdowns. He does more than enough, more than what he needed to lock up the Heisman. So I think we're going to split here. I agree with your Mac Jones pick. I'm going to give it to Najee Harris. Alabama took over the game.
Yeah, I can't be mad at that pick at all, for sure.
Well, they took over the game officially in the third quarter, and he scored all 3 of their touchdowns during that quarter when they were 21-7 against Florida. They took an 18-point lead into halftime, and Najee Harris was the big reason why. So we're in agreement, but we're somewhat split on who we'd vote for. And had we been there and cast our ballots, then maybe it would have split and Devontae Smith wins MVP.
Yeah, this was one of those games too where, I think traditional Alabama fans did not have a lot of fun in situations like this, but this team was built to win shootouts. And I would say this was kind of the general vibe for the sort of end of the 2010s, beginning of the 2020s for Alabama. And this is the kind of team that you would have to do that against. You'd have to be able to go up against like that. Kyle Trask had an incredible game. Kyle Trask finishes this game 408 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and 65% completion percentage. And this guy was also in the running for the Heisman. He was a very serious candidate, and he had a ton of weapons that he could work with. He had Kadarius Toney, he had Kyle Pitts. These are big name dudes in the NFL right now, and only an equally great offensive team on the other side was going to be able to outpace a team like this, I think.
Matt, quick tangent here. You mentioned him as a Heisman finalist. Let's have this quick conversation right now. So the Heisman finalists that year were Kyle Trask, Trevor Lawrence, and 2 Alabama players, Devontae Smith, who won the award, and Mac Jones. Who deserved the Heisman between Devontae Smith and Mac Jones? Did the Heisman voters get it right?
You and I debated this a lot at the time, I think, and I think I definitely did call Devontae being the guy probably in the Arkansas game. I think if I remember that, and I am notorious for prematurely declaring that something is going to happen in college football, but I think that I felt like after that punt return touchdown, the momentum was there, the sort of like narrative and the buzz you have to win a Heisman was there for him. But I think, honestly, I think that Najee deserved to be a finalist. I think it was a statistically superlative season for Najee. I think he was a special player that was equally responsible for the success that team had. But all 3 of those guys, I couldn't be mad about any of them having won it, because individually, separated from each other, they had Heisman numbers that season. That in any other year, you could have looked at that and said, this is the kind of season you have that wins you a Heisman Trophy. I think Devontae got it because the spectacular nature of some of his big plays, and I think there was a level of novelty to a wide receiver being that dominant. I think people got, in a similar way to Travis Hunter maybe last year, people just seeing something they'd never seen before. It's exciting. Seeing a wide receiver that was that dominant was so rare and novel in college football, and I think it helped Devontae be the guy that ultimately won.
Yeah. Look, Matt, listen to these stats quickly. I mean, Mac Jones, 4,500 yards passing, 77%
in a 12-game season, by the way.
77% completion percentage, 41 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, rating of 203 plus. Najee Harris, 1,466 yards, 6 yards a carry, 26 rushing touchdowns, 4 receiving touchdowns, so 30 total touchdowns for Najee Harris.
And no question, by the way, that Najee would have the single season school record, I think, if it had been a normal 15-game season or whatever it is now. It's probably more than that. But at the time, if you had gone all the way to the national championship, you would have played 15 games. I think Najee certainly would have surpassed Derrick Henry's numbers.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, all-time leader in rushing. But Devontae Smith, and I'll finish it, 117 receptions, 1,856 yards, 23 touchdowns. Just a mega star. I mean, any three of those guys could have won the Heisman in a different, season. Like if they didn't play on the same team. It's ridiculous that Najee Harris didn't go to New York and wasn't a finalist that year, and that would have been incredible and historic had he gone. But it's tough. The toss-up really is Mac Jones or Devontae Smith. Who wins the Heisman? I'm not going to disagree with the Heisman folks, but where I will disagree is Mac Jones, I think, finished third in voting, and Trevor Lawrence ended up finishing second. That is wretched, dude. That is ridiculous.
For the season that Clemson had that year, yes, I agree. That was just not. It was not a great Clemson team. They did not win the ACC. I believe Notre Dame actually won the ACC championship game that year because, again, 2020. So nothing normal happened that year. But it just, I feel like Trevor Lawrence at the time had a little bit of that Tim Tebow shine on him that was just like, it's impossible not to talk about this guy. He was sort of the face of college football at the time.
Yeah, I guess. But I mean, come on, dude. Like Mac Jones literally has one of the best quarterback seasons anyone has ever had in the history of the game. So it was dumb. He should have been second and maybe even should have won Heisman, like flip a coin and there's your winner. Okay. Now we move on to the next segment, next category. What Saban said. We listen back to what Nick Saban said post-game. Any rants, any big moments that we might remember from the press conference or post-game interview? What do we have?
Yeah, so I've got his sort of opening statement here. And I think you'll hear him talk about how much he loves this team generally. And that's something that we don't hear Saban say a ton. I think he tends to say it about teams that have a very specific accomplishment. And that would
this is like the hardened father finally saying, I love you.
I think he does it to teams that go undefeated. And he was feeling pretty good about that happening for this team at that point.
Great Santini.
Throughout the season to win 11 games is, pretty phenomenal. I speaks to the togetherness on the team. Everybody sort of buying in and trying to do the things that they needed to do to contribute to the team. The game tonight was we found a way to win. I knew it was going to be a tough matchup with Florida because of number 84 and number 1 are really, really good players and tough guys to cover. And, they certainly hurt us. And we couldn't get the stops on defense on third down that we needed to get off the field. So they ended up scoring a lot of points. But I have to give our offense a lot of credit. They answered the bell pretty consistently in the game. Over 600 yards. Smitty had 15 catches. Najee scored 5 touchdowns, had 178 yards rushing, caught 5 passes. I mean, these guys are pretty phenomenal all year, and they certainly delivered tonight when we needed them to.
So I've also got another clip of Saban specifically talking about the play that we mentioned earlier, the John Mechie forced fumble. And I thought it was interesting. He gives kind of an interesting analysis of why John Mechie was able to make that play in his sort of assessment. So I'll play that now.
Well, that was a great play, no doubt. I mean, it was not a great play for us, for them to get an interception, but for guys to keep hustling. And we do every day for the first 5 minutes of practice. We do about, maybe 8 or 9 different sort of take care of the ball type drills. So he's always on the other end of that. But, we do circle chase, we do midline, we do stumble bum, we do stiff arm.
Nobody knows.
So he knows exactly what the defensive players are trying to do to get the ball out, because we do it every day. And he's the other guy. All right, so tonight he had a chance to strip it out. But I'm sure that those experiences of working every day against the defensive players, trying to get it out on him, was where he got the idea of how to get it out.
So an interesting kind of thought from Saban, that basically the fact that he had to participate in these defensive drills of stripping the ball so many times sort of prepared him for that moment uniquely.
We do Circle K, we do In and Out, we do
Stumble bum.
McDonald's, we do Subway. He just starts naming fast food restaurants that are turnover drills, ball security drills. Yeah, I think that in the previous clip where he's talking about the offensive player production, that where he says Najee Harris, he had 31 carries, he had 5 receptions, and he goes, I mean is so loaded there in that clip. That's like, seriously, that's the dad who never shows any emotion finally hinting that he cares about you a little bit.
You're talking about impressing the guy who has coached already in his career 6 other national championship teams. That is really saying something. Like the fact that you can sort of take this guy's breath away at this stage in his career is pretty impressive.
All right, Matt, last category, takeaways. We want to know, what were the consequences? Does this game look any different with the benefit of history? Look, I think that this game gave Alabama fans at the time the confidence that they needed going into the college football playoff. And they'd obviously play Notre Dame in the semifinals. They would win that fairly easily, even though it didn't look like much. I think it was 31-14 in the relocated Rose Bowl in Arlington, Texas. And they'd smack Ohio State, a team that had really only played about half a season in the national championship in Miami. That was 52-24, where Devontae Smith has like 200 plus yards in the first half and doesn't even play in the second half with a broken hand. It was clear that, as you said earlier, nobody could stop Steve Sarkisian's offense. It was clear that Devontae Smith was the best player in the country, perhaps along with Mac Jones and even Najee Harris. And they had the best players at the 3 biggest positions on offense. They had the best offensive line, despite losing Landon Dickerson for the last game. To me, this was a game that the defense really needed, like a bit of a wake-up call, that good teams could score on them at will sometimes. And they needed to tighten up before they played a good team like Ohio State, with talented players like Justin Fields and Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, and even future Alabama star Jamison Williams, who played in that championship game against Alabama. But, to me, Matt, this game is going to be remembered for so many different reasons. It was really just a mere stepping stone on their way to winning Saban's last national title at Alabama. It obviously, as we've said many times here, it clinched the Heisman for Smith. It clinched Mac Jones as a finalist. It was one of the top Najee Harris games, and it's just one of the best displays of Alabama's offensive dominance in 2020, and one of really Sark's masterpieces as a play caller.
Yeah, I think so. And I think in general, this 2020 team will be something that we look back on as weird as it was. Maybe the last time that Alabama had the kind of edge over the rest of the sport that they had at their absolute peak under Nick Saban. It's hard to imagine anyone ever amassing that kind of advantage ever again in this sport. I guess you never say never, but I mean, look, we're talking about a team that all of those offensive stars that we just talked about. This team also had Will Anderson. This team had Brian Branch. This team had, by the way, also Malachi Moore and Tim Smith, who just now are going into the NFL. As long ago as this feels, but I mean, a team that had just in general such an incredible stockpile of talent at every position, and it was literally right before everything changed when NIL became a part of the sport. And I don't know that anyone would ever use the word pure, but I think that this was kind of the end of an era in college football. It's set apart from everything else too, but in some ways it's a little bit of this like dividing line. It was the last year that college football resembled anything that came before it.
Good note to end on there, Matt. You're absolutely right. Okay, that's number 14 on the list of Alabama football's 15 best games of the 21st century. Do you agree with our picks? Let us know in the comments. You can find Beat Everyone on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. And once again, our thanks to our good friend and former Alabama wide receiver, Slade Bolden, for helping us relive this awesome game. He was a major contributor to it, so shout out to Slade. Shout out to Charlie Scott.
That's
Again,
right.
Matt, before we go, Charlie Scott, Alabama legend and hero in this game. And thanks as usual to our pal and Beat Everyone producer, Matt Scalisi. Matt, thanks for doing this again. We'll do it again as soon as we go to 13. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.